All right, well, my title is The Dead Sea Scrolls, the Holy Grail of the Old Testament, and I really do believe that this has been a keystone for many people to put their trust in the accuracy and reliability of our Old Testament. I'm not going to be talking about the New Testament today. I have a separate lesson for that. Maybe next year I'll have a chance to do that. This is in the Israel Museum. It's called the Shrine of the Book. This is part of the scroll of Isaiah, and you're not supposed to take pictures, but I have to admit I've repented of this, so I'm okay. So anyway, they had that portion. Now, in the old days, around the rotunda of the Shrine of the Book, they have a replica of the scroll of Isaiah. I saw the original back in 1990 in that building. So you'll, if you go to the Reagan Library in before, I think, September, they have an exhibit of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Did anybody get a chance when it was in Salt Lake City to see the Dead Sea Scrolls? One person. You guys missed out. Bill saw it as well in the room, and it was an excellent display. In fact, you see more at those displays than you will see at the Shrine of the Book. They have some of the better pieces at the Shrine of the Book, but this is in Israel, called the Israel Museum. But anyway, I took this picture, and look how well preserved that is. I want to read a couple of quotes from Randall Price. He wrote a book called Secrets of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And by the way, I just brought my books just to show you. I'm fascinated with this topic ever since I took a class in 1990 when I went to Israel with my professor, Ronald Youngblood, a translator of the New Testament. He had an archaeology class in 1989, and I was just fascinated with the Dead Sea Scrolls. And then in 1990, I had a chance to go to Qumran for the first time with him and see that. And so, but anyway, these are all the books that I have read on the topic. And I was just telling somebody before that you could go to the Reagan Library and go to that exhibit. They'll probably have 100 different books on that topic. So there's lots of material here, lots of theories out there. I'll talk about some of those, but let me read from an archaeologist named Randy Price. He is a professor at Liberty University. And in his book, Secrets of the Dead Sea Scrolls, he says, every person with a cursory knowledge of the Dead Sea Scrolls has been told that they are significant because they confirm for us the accuracy of the Old Testament text. This is true, and it was one of the most obvious benefits derived from discovering the scrolls. He also wrote, before the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, the biblical text of the Old Testament was known only from a text dating to the Middle Ages. The earliest known complete Hebrew manuscript of the Old Testament was the Ben Asher Codex in the Public Library of Leningrad. That was our oldest copy of the Bible that dated to about AD 1008. Because of the vast amount of time that passed between the writing of the originals and the 10th century copy, it was assumed that generations of scribes had entered mistakes of transmission into the biblical text. These doubts were settled forever with one of the first scrolls discovered, which was a copy of the entire book of Isaiah. You'll hear me talk more about the entire book of Isaiah, but the other discoveries in the caves that we have found are just helpful to us to help know that the transmission was good. I'm going to talk now real quickly, and I want to go over how did we know what we had in the Old Testament before the middle of the 20th century, 1950s. Well, we had what's called the Masoretic text. That would have been the main text that would have been used, the Hebrew Bible. And until the 6th century, only the consonants of the Hebrew Old Testament were written down. There were no vowels. So that would have been all the way until the 6th century, the 500s. You have the Masorete Jews. They're learning to add vowels, accents, and notes so it could be read easier. It was hard to read, and so they did that to help that and pronounce the words. Then we have what's called the Leningrad Codex. You heard Price talk about that from 1009. That was used as a standard. It was complete. We also have the Aleppo Codex, which you can see at the Shrine of the Book. I'm taking a trip again in March, taking people. In fact, some of you who are going on that trip are here today. You'll have a chance to go and see the Aleppo Codex as well as the old pieces of the Dead Sea Scrolls. But that is important because it's earlier, 925 AD, and it, like I said, is housed there at the Shrine of the Book. We also would use the Septuagint. Now that's abbreviated LXX. There was a guy named Alexander the Great. He conquers the world. And when he conquers the world, he ends up making Greek the international lingua. It's called lingua franca, the language that would be international, like English is pretty much today in our world. So LXX, 70 scholars by tradition in Alexandria, Egypt, translated in 285. For a lot of Jews, they ended up losing their Hebrew ability, and that's why today a lot of Jewish people will have their children go through bar mitzvahs at 12 or 13 for the girls, bat mitzvahs. They will have them do that because they learn to read the Hebrew, so they don't lose their heritage. But that Septuagint is hugely important because we have very good identification of that before the time of the Bible, quoted by the New Testament. In fact, in your New Testament, when they're quoting, oftentimes it's coming from the Septuagint when they're quoting whole sections. The early church fathers used it. Earliest translation of the entire Old Testament is our Septuagint. So it's hugely important. Very appreciated by the Christians. The Jews really didn't care for it so much, and so not as used by the Jews. But it is the official text as well of the Greek Orthodox Church. But we also, besides the Septuagint, we also have what are called Targums. An Aramaic Targum was climaxed in the 3rd to 5th centuries AD, and they specialize in Leviticus and Job. If you want to get the earliest of Leviticus and Job, you're going to go to the Aramaic Targums. Then we have what's called the Peshitta, which is an Aramaic, and that was a Syrian church, probably 2nd century AD, and it came from the Hebrew. So here's the disadvantage when you're going to the Septuagint or the Targums or the Vulgate or wherever you're going to go, is that this is a translation from the Hebrew. So it's a second-hand source. And so when you translate that into English, that's a third hand. And it's typically better to have the Hebrew, but I'm just saying this is what we had available before we were able to get this incredible discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Vulgate you've heard of before. A guy named Jerome translated that in Bethlehem. And when we go to Bethlehem, if we have a chance, we'll go into where his study was at the Church of the Nativity. It's really interesting to see where he translated the Septuagint, where he's translated the Vulgate, and it was dependent on the Septuagint. And that was used by the early Bible translators. John Wycliffe, for instance, translated from the Vulgate. So he's translating into English from the Vulgate. Later, Luther and Tyndale and others are now going to be able to translate from the Greek, and then they still use the Septuagint. That's what they had for the Hebrew. And so that's what I'm saying. The weakness of all of those are one step removed from the original. So that is kind of a background of what we had before we got to the Dead Sea Scrolls. So let's talk now. The topic of today's discussion is on the Dead Sea Scrolls. What are they? And the yellow, by the way, is where you can fill in. If you're taking notes, you can fill in the blanks. And so ancient manuscripts discovered in 11 different caves. Those of you who got that one right. Near Qumran, which is in northwestern Dead Sea. I will show you a map of that a little later. So this is what these are. These are ancient manuscripts. And as you were surprised, most of you were surprised when you took that quiz, and about a little over 25% are biblical. The rest are other kinds of texts, and we'll talk about that. All are Jewish religious works. So they're either going to be Old Testament, there'll be Apocrypha, there'll be Pseudepigrapha, there'll be sectarian texts. There's a variety of things that this group called the Essenes used to transmit the text, mainly onto vellum. And these are the oldest Old Testament manuscripts in existence. So this is in the lifetime of probably nobody here, but 1947 was not that long ago. I mean, think about it. It just was not that long ago when this amazing discovery took place, and the stories that come out of this, you're going to, I think, be fascinated. So they're discovered between 47 and 56, 11 different caves found in that time. To be a cave considered to be part of that number, 11, you have to find at least one text. Now, Randall Price found a cave that he is sure there had been texts in there because he saw some of the things that would have gone with the text, but they were gone. They were stolen. So they did not get counted. You may have heard of one found a few years ago. They didn't find one text. That means it's not counted, even though it was probably holding Dead Sea Scrolls. The scrolls were produced somewhere between 200 BC to 80, 68. Many of them that were done there, and some that would have come from Jerusalem and other places. And there are a total of about 930 to 950 different manuscripts, scrolls, many of them in pieces, most of them, the vast majority. In fact, we only have one complete scroll of anything, and that's not true, because we do have the War Scroll found in Cave 11, but as far as the Bible, we only have one scroll that's complete, and very few are complete. Most of them are in pieces. Also, these were mainly written in Qumran, Jerusalem, and other places where these Essenes collected these scrolls. 233, just 233 are from the Old Testament. Now, I think that surprises a lot of people. It surprised most of you who did not get that question right, and that's why I asked it, because I think most people think, oh, we got all Old Testament, all the scrolls. It's not true. Only a little more than 1/4 of those scrolls were from the Old Testament. Every book, though, of the 11 caves that we have are of every book in the Old Testament except for one. If you've taken my tour, you know I always emphasize this, the book of Esther. That's the next fill-in. The book of Esther. And there's speculation as to why that is. Well, probably because you have a woman as the heroine, and that might not have gone over so well. We do have Ruth there. We do have Ruth in the story of Ruth, but only a couple of copies of that. Also, possibly God's name is not mentioned in the book of Esther, and that might have had a problem. And so they didn't have anything with Esther, but otherwise, everything has at least one copy. I said Ezra and Nehemiah just has one copy, and then we have others that have multiple copies, and we'll get into that. But I want to point this out from the very beginning. There are no copies of the New Testament. A lot of the writers, in fact, one of the books here talks about how John the Baptist may have been involved with the Qumran sect because he was working in that area. And he had similar kinds of beliefs. He was doing baptisms, and they had mikvah, a variety of places to do ceremonial cleansings. And so they felt maybe he got a lot of that from the Qumran community, but we do not have any evidence. They have actually taken a couple of Greek letters, because there's some that are in Greek, and there's a couple of Greek letters, and they say, oh, this looks like a piece of mark, but it's very flimsy, and it does not really compute with most of the scholars. What did they use to write on? Well, there are two main types. They had parchment called vellum, animal skin. They won't use pig skin because it's not kosher. We have three varieties of the skins they could have used. We have deer skin, we have calf skin, and we also have sheep skin. We have Torah scroll fragments in our museum here at the Utah Christian Research Center. That was the majority of what they would have had, mainly calf skin. 90% of the scrolls were made of vellum, and only 10% were papyrus. We have a piece of papyrus in the front room, and that was a cheaper way to go, but most Old Testament's going to be written on the parchment. In the New Testament, the first 3 centuries, they mainly used papyrus. That was the main thing they would have used. But one scroll, and I have it pictured here, it's called 3Q15. They only found 15 fragments, and none of them seemed to relate to the rest of the Qumran community. And then you had one on bronze. It's very rare to write anything on metal. That's just a very rare thing. And these were found on copper, and they're 1 millimeter in size, and they were rolled up. So you can see there's 2 of them there, and they had to unroll them. And it took a special discovery of a machine that could actually do that. 87% of those were written in Hebrew, 10% Aramaic, and a few in Greek altogether. Besides the copper scrolls, that's just a real rare thing, and almost none found intact, but rather in pieces. I'll talk more about the copper scrolls when I go through each of the caves, but for the most part, everything's found in pieces. This is like taking jigsaw puzzles and just throwing them together, especially in Cave 4, where the majority of the scrolls were discovered. how would you like to have little tiny pieces and try to put all these different puzzles? Let's say you take 20 different puzzles of 500 pieces and just put them all together, and you don't have all the pieces because they're not all there. The Bedouin had gotten some of them, especially in Cave 4, so you're going to have to really work hard to try to put all of that together. Let's talk about the group that put these scrolls together and hid them in these caves in the hills of this northwestern Judean desert area. The Essenes. They're a Jewish priestly sect. These are like the Pharisees and the Sadducees, although they did not like either group. They thought they were both heretical for a variety of reasons. But they felt that they were the true priestly sect, and they separated from those, from everybody out in the desert, mostly celibate. They were strict in their kosher ideas, their obedience to the Torah, especially on the Sabbath. They had a toilet, actually, they discovered, that was it was far enough that on the Sabbath, you could not do a number 2 on the Sabbath. You had to really be careful. But if you wanted to be tempted to go to that toilet, you can only go so many steps. And so the toilet was enough steps for you to get to it, but not enough steps to get back. Can you imagine? So they actually had that, and they've done research on that toilet. I don't know, archaeologists really love finding toilets, finding out what people ate and all of the rest. But this group, very strict, they called themselves the Yahad, the community. That was their word, their code word for who they were. Like we like to be called Christians. They were the Yahad, or the community. They were Zadokite Jews. Zadok was a priest with Solomon, and they believed they came straight from Solomon. They did not like the Hasmoneans. They did not like Judas Maccabees and all the others that we can read about in the Apocrypha. They felt that they polluted the priesthood. And so they were Zadokite Jews, left Jerusalem sometime in the 2nd century BC because they did not agree with the Hasmoneans and the things that they were doing and who they were handing the priesthood over to. So it gets quite complicated, but just so you know, these guys do have bloodlines that went back to the priest of Solomon. And he was around for David as well, Zadok. Described by the historians, we find out a lot of information from Pliny the Elder, Philo, a Roman historian, and Josephus, the Jewish historian, who was at one time captured by the Romans, and he ends up saving his life, and he becomes the official Jewish historian. Josephus is interesting because he writes more about the Essenes than he does about the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And you know why? Because this group of people sold magazines, if you will. I mean, he knew that they were more interested in the bathroom habits of the Essenes and all the weird things that they did than anything that they could find out about the Sadducees and the Pharisees. So he wrote more about them. So we find out probably more about the Essenes from Josephus than anybody else. We certainly don't find out anything about the Essenes from the Bible because it doesn't talk about this group, where it does talk about the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Well, who were those guys? They were adult males typically, although women were part of this as well. They were not allowed to have defects. Priests were not allowed to have defects. And it would take 2 to 3 years for initiation to be able to become one of the Yahad. Communal group, they shared everything. This was, if you're talking communism, everything was shared. It was pooled together. They focused and they were big on end times. They really believed the coming of the Messiah, another fill-in, that the end of the days had started and that they were to be a part of that. Which is interesting because during the time of this group called the Essenes, Jesus was here. He was not far away, and they did not recognize him. They were looking for the Messiah, and they missed it, as many people do today. Their leader was a man, a real man. We don't know who it is, but they called him a teacher of righteousness, and apparently was not living when a lot of the things were written about this man. But he gave biblical prophecies. And this man did not agree, like I said, with the Hasmonean priesthood that went from 164 BC to 63 BC. That all comes from the Maccabean revolt. Jonathan Maccabee is considered, he was a priest, and he's considered to be a wicked priest because he was not of the right bloodline. He he ends up getting the priesthood illegally. And so they did not like him. And so when it mentioned wicked priests, it was talking about Jonathan Maccabee. The sons of Zadok that they were the sons of light. They were the good guys. And everyone else, including Jews, who were not part of them, were sons of darkness. And they believed there would be a 40-year war to be able to take over the sons of darkness. And like the War Scroll, like I mentioned, the longest scroll that was discovered of the Dead Sea Scrolls in Cave 11, that scroll talks about the end times, very much written like a revelation. And so the sons of darkness would be overtaken. They also believed that they would take the Romans over and they would win in the final battle with the Romans and other Jews. They were all the enemies, everybody but us, and they were their own little encampment out in the desert in Qumran. They did expect two messiahs, royal, interestingly enough, from David. They expected one priestly from Aaron, and you could make a case for a third one, a prophetic Messiah. Is that too far off the mark for us as Christians? I mean, Hebrews talks about Jesus being the Levitical, the Davidic, very clearly, all the prophecy that's used. Anyway, that's who they expected to come and save the day. But it wasn't the teacher of righteousness. He was just a good man. Also, they believed you had to go through what's called ritual immersion in what are called mikvah, singular mikvayot. These are pools you have steps going into. You can see those throughout Israel. You can see it at the southern steps in Jerusalem. You can see it in Bethsaida. You can see it at Qumran. They have several pools with steps that would go in. And they believed this could also remove sin and transgression. And then when you enter the Yahad, that's when you were fully ritually pure. And so it took, like I said, several years for you to be able to enter into the Yahad. That teacher of righteousness was revealed, they believe, through biblical prophecies that he made. And so they were the sons of light, and the Jews were the sons of darkness. Believed they would conquer the Romans. And that strict predestination, they were very much like the Pharisees were. They believed everything was set, both good and bad. And so, you can make a case. Jesus talked a lot about those kinds of things. And Paul talks about predestination coming from the Pharisees. Well, they were as well. This is a picture that I took of the graveyard that's east of the Qumran village, looking out to the Dead Sea. It's, again, at the northwestern top of the Dead Sea, and Jordan's on the other side of that Dead Sea. They found 1,100 graves, 46 they unburied. All but 3 were men, and the others are women. So mainly men. And so most of the scholars believe that although women weren't allowed to be a part of the group, they weren't normally going to be the members of this group. It was mainly a man-oriented religion. They had a scroll that was found, and it's called 1QS. First cave of Qumran. S stands for the community rule. This was the rules that they had for their group. This is what it says. Now, this is the rule for the men of the community. That is, for those of their own volition, turn away from all evil and cling to all he commanded us according to his will. They should separate from the congregation of wicked men and become a community in doctrine and in common possession of property, socially, having everything be all of ours, not yours, not mine, and conduct their affairs under the direction of the sons of Zadok, who are the priests, who keep the covenant, and under the direction of the full body of the men of the community, which is a community of men who hold fast to the covenant. So here they're talking about men, and that's where, with this literary information as well as the graves, very few women, they might have been there, but not. And we found some implements like combs and other things that women would have used in the archaeology there, but they're talking here about men. Under their direction, every decision will be made in every matter of doctrine, community property, and enforcement of rules, so that they may together have with integrity and humility, with righteousness and justice and love, of kindness, so that they may be careful to walk in all the ways of the community, and that no one may walk in the stubbornness of his heart and go astray, following his own heart and eyes and inclinations. Sound like a Jewish group? Isn't this very much a Jewish group? You got to keep the rules. What's the most important books for them? As it is for Jewish people today? The Torah, the Pentateuch, the first 5, the rules. I mean, they found more copies of Deuteronomy than any other book. Amazing that they're very close to the way their Pharisee and Sadducee brothers would have been, especially the Pharisees. They're very close, even though they criticized them. Let me give you the location. You got the Sea of Galilee, you got the Jordan River, and you got the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea has been receding in the past 100 years because people have been taking the water from both Jordan and Israel, and so it has shrunk in size. But this is a satellite photo, and the star shows you right on the edge of where the Dead Sea is.
Jerusalem is just to the west from there.
Yeah, let me show you another one. I'll show you. So you got Qumran there on the right-hand side. You've got Jericho up north. You've got to the west, you've got Jerusalem, and you also have Bethlehem. So it gives you an idea for some of the names I'll be using, and it's not that far. To drive from Jerusalem to Qumran, we're talking 35 to 40 minutes. Not far.
I mean, it's like driving up the canyons, too.
It is, because Jerusalem is up high. And so, yes, and this is down low. In fact, the Dead Sea is the lowest place in the entire world. And the water is the saltiest, and you can float in that. But what's interesting, it snows usually once a year in Jerusalem, not far away. It never snows in the Dead Sea. And the temperatures, this is a bad time to be going right now. Temperatures, late May, June, July, August, can get up to 120, 130 degrees. So you don't want to go. If somebody invites you to Israel in the summer, it sounds like, oh yeah, great. Don't go. I've gone in September, and it was brutal. It was very hot. I like to go in February, March, when it's very nice and cool.
And this is also where a lot of the pilgrims would come up. So, I mean, they're walking right by these guys as they're not far away. So it's a little bit like, the Mennonite enclave, like, well, we don't go over there, but everybody kind of knows they're there.
Right, yes. So they're enough separated to be, yeah, right. So they're close enough to Jerusalem. Someday they hope to maybe take it over, but they're the rightful owners of that temple. I mentioned this is a mikvayot. Mikvah is plural. On the left-hand side is a ritual bath. Some other pictures from the village which they uncovered, and they thought it was just Roman, and then they realized this is actually a Jewish sect. Once they put the scrolls together with this site, which is right where all the caves are in the hills, and so you see, today you can go visit, walk around in this area. There was sign of an earthquake, 31 BC, that there was this earthquake, and it split. This is a mikvayot, and the steps kind of got messed up. That's from 2,000-year-old earthquake that was identified by Josephus and other historians. They took possession of that area, the Qumran village, Kerbet, they call it, 100 BC, destroyed by an earthquake. There was a fire in 9 BC. We have that evidence to know. And eventually the Romans took it over in AD 68. I'm not going to get so deep into where they lived and all of that, just to give you an idea, though, of where they were living. And they end up getting kicked out in AD 68. And they end up leaving, and I'll talk about where they most likely went to and why they never came back to get the scrolls. Have you ever wondered about that? Why didn't they come back to get these scrolls? Maybe they left in a rush, and it looks like they were in a rush because a lot of them were just thrown into the cave and then not to be discovered until 2,000 years later. Pottery that was made. This would be a replica, and I'll pass this around so you can see it. This is what in Cave 1 they found the scrolls, and why they were so well preserved, because they have these big pots that they made, and this pottery is from Qumran. They actually had a place where they would have taken the mud from and made clay. So I'll pass that around just to give you an idea of the pots that they found. Storing the Dead Sea Scrolls, the kiln. There's the kiln right there with that guy standing in front of it. And they can actually test the pottery to see where it came from, because they were using certain kind of dirt there. And so they could test it to see, is that from Qumran or not? They actually went to Masada, and they found pottery that came from the kiln at Qumran. So that's why we do know for a fact that there were Essenes that were at Masada. Half the pottery came from Jerusalem. The rest came from that kiln. There's a closer look of the kiln, and rebuilt, of course. But so there was pottery from Jerusalem because some of the scrolls do come from Jerusalem. This gives you an overall view. There's a tower up there in the front. If you see that tower, that was facing south. And so if you're coming from Jerusalem, that would have been a place for them to know that you were coming and for some protection. And I know it's hard to see that. It's not very big, but it shows you some of that area there. What they would do to get their water, because this is a desert, but there are wadis. There's a wadi called Wadi Qumran right next to it, and it comes from the hills right here. In fact, I took a picture here of the hills, and they actually built channels to bring water in to the whole area. And in one storm, one big, what do you call that? When it rains big in the desert, it's a flood. I'm sorry? A flash flood, yeah. So I actually took this picture of water. This is rare, but because there had been heavy, heavy rains in 2015, Bill and I were in Jerusalem, and I had never seen water in the channel that would have taken the water from the hill and move it into the area. And you can see from the right-hand side, those hills right there, you can see Wadi Qumran. Wadi's a dry riverbed, and so when it rains really heavy, they would divert the water. You'll see this also at Masada. They'll take the water. In Masada, they move it to their cisterns. Here, they're moving it through, and you can see this all the way through, and they're moving it into pools, their mikvah, different places like that. They had several mikvah. They had several cisterns for their water and pools that they would have been able to use. That gives you a really good idea with that watchtower out in front there facing north. And if you look here, you can see caves 4, 10, and 5. Now, from the village itself, you can actually see cave 4. Cave 4 is probably the most important besides cave 1 because we found more scrolls in that cave than any other cave. Cave 10, you can't see unless you walk around there, cave 5, but you can see cave 4. Those who are going with me to Israel will be able to see that. But anyway, that gives you an idea of the overall look. They had what they believed was called a scriptorium, and many of the scholars think it was 2 stories in height. So they actually would have had a place where scribal activity would have taken place. So that gives you an idea right there where that building would have been. Here's another view. And so it says see the scriptorium on the left-hand side in the front? So you have the watchtower there. This is a view of today. And the scriptorium, and you can walk into it today, would have been where this 2-story building would have been. They had pottery workshop, the kiln I showed you, assembly hall, they had quarters. They don't believe that it was big enough for very many people to live here, and they're not sure where they live, but they thought maybe they either lived in those caves that are out across the wadi, or they may have lived in tents outside this area. This is one artist's version of what that could have looked like, writing on these tables, although this is controversial. But how do we know that they actually would have done any writing here? Well, they found 6 inkwells. Jody Magnus wrote perhaps the best book that I have enjoyed the most. Jody Magnus wrote a book called The Archaeology of Qumran and the Dead Sea Scrolls. She's a Jewish scholar. Highly recommend this book. Out of all the books I've read, I would read this one first. This book here, and by the way, I thought we had some copies. We don't. I'm going to order some. Next week we will have some of these copies if you were interested in purchasing one. You have to be able to focus on it. It's written very, very scholarly, but it's readable. It is a readable layperson book if you want one. Another one that would be very readable would be called The Secrets of the Dead Sea Scrolls by Randall Price that I mentioned. He's a Christian, and that is a good one, and that might be a little easier than Magnus's. But anyway, she said that in her entire career of doing archaeology, she can count on one hand how many inkwells she has found at dozens of sites of digging. And here at one site, they found 6 inkwells where they would have kept the special carbon-based ink, and they would have had a feather pen, and they would have used that. 6 of them. Also, they found these tables. They're not sure how these tables were used. The debate is very heavy on this. Were they actually tables used? What were they? And we don't know. I mean, that's the bottom line. That's the scholars will say. We're not quite sure. However, some would say perhaps they would have used that for writing on. But they did find those tables. So what ends up happening in AD 68, the Romans are taking over Israel. They're making their way to Jerusalem, but they're conquering everything else outside. So they go down here, and they basically kick these guys out. These guys end up leaving. The Essenes are forced out, and we believe many of them go to Masada, which is about driving maybe about 30 minutes south. And Masada, are you familiar with Masada? It is a place that was built by Herod the Great, a big, huge rock. You could actually take a cable car up there, or for those of you who are in shape, can go up the snake path. There's a way that it's the ancient path to get up there. It's quite a hike. It takes about 45 minutes. It's well worth, if you're in shape, to be able to do that. But otherwise, you get up there with the cable car, and it's this huge plateau. And on there, Herod the Great built a 3-tiered palace. Amazing. You can still see remnants of that palace. You can go down the stairs and actually see that. You can see the cistern where they kept the water. He had storage. He built all this storage places that he could put all his grain. So when the Jerusalem is destroyed, well, the zealots and other Jews end up taking this over from the small garrison that probably was behind trying to protect this. And once they lost it, once you own the top of this, you can control it. And so there were 1,000 Jewish people who lived on top of this. After the Romans were finished with Jerusalem, a few years later, they said, you know what, this is just not good. And so they ended up building a ramp up to the top of Masada to eradicate the 1,000 Jews that were up there. There was some cat and mouse things that were happening. You can read about this from Josephus. They eventually, they are able to build this ramp and get a battering ram to break down the door. And they get in there and they're ready to do battle, but nobody was there to do battle. And they were like shocked, what's going on? Well, it turned out that the Jewish leaders decided they didn't want to live if they had to live under Roman bondage. So all 1,000 people, except for 6 people, a couple of women and some children who hid out in a cistern. Otherwise, everybody died. The father would kill the family and his wife, and then somebody would kill him, and they were left with 10 people. At the end, they drew lots to see who would be killed first, and they would kill that person and that person and that person until the last guy falls on his sword. And so, in fact, for many years, the Jewish army used to go up there, and they would have a patch on their uniform that would have a rock, and it would say in Hebrew, "Never again will we allow anybody to take us over like this." So it's kind of a national pride. It's the most visited place in all of Israel. #1 tourist site is Masada. So I always make sure it has nothing to do with Christianity, but Herod the Great has a huge impact there. But this is where we believe the Essenes had gone. And think about it. Do you think they wanted to go back and get their manuscripts? Well, I'm sure they did, but they died. And so nobody's left to be able to get them, which I write there on the bottom, God is sovereign. What a gift, though, despite the tragedy from 2,000 years ago, that we are going to benefit because of that tragedy. Yeah.
I had heard once, and maybe this isn't true, but that it might play into this, what you just said. But I heard that scholars were starting to believe that the reason they put them in the caves were that they were scheduled for destruction because they had more than 5 years.
There is some ideas of that. However, and so where did the scrolls come from? Some would have said maybe it came from Jerusalem, and so those were scrolls they used. We know that some of them came from Jerusalem. We know that some of them were produced there. I find that hard to believe, because the only way that you can get rid of scrolls is by burning them. No, excuse me, not by burning them, by burying them. You can't burn them, you can't throw them away. The cave is not really a burial place. I mean, that's not what any Jewish person would have, they had a graveyard there, but I don't buy it, and no, the scholars don't either. So the idea that they were going to come back most likely is, I think, very likely. And the evidence that we have up there on Masada, nobody ever returns to retrieve those. I just think there's value. I mean, some of these were in good shape. I mean, over 2,000 years, they fell apart, obviously. And the reason why they stayed so well is because of the dry weather. But I would say that I don't buy into that. I don't buy that they were just left behind, and because we don't see that anywhere else. We really don't. I want to tell you of something that happened, and many of you, this is discussed in Magnus's book, and I find it to be an interesting story, and I didn't know it until I was preparing this presentation. A guy named Shapira, he was an antiquities dealer in Jerusalem, a Jewish convert to Christianity. He got 15 scroll fragments that the Bedouins said they found in a cave near the Dead Sea in 1883. Interesting. They were inscribed in Hebrew. He said they came from the book of Deuteronomy, and he offered to sell them to the British Museum for £1 million. Now, the Bible Museum in Washington, D.C. got in some trouble back a few years ago when they purchased over $1 million. They bought, I think, 5 pieces of what they thought were Dead Sea Scroll pieces. It turns out they were fake. And in fact, the guy named Kondo, his son, I think, was a part of that whole thing, and they were made. Oh, we have a guy named Mark Hoffman. Have you ever heard of Mark Hoffman? So it's possible to fake things, and they say, if you ever watch that show, The Pawn Stars, they always say, for every one of these that are real, we have 1,000 fakes, because they're getting really good. They're not just photocopying $100 bills. They're doing all kinds of things to make it pass the test. So anyway, he says, I'll give it to you for £1 million. But then there was this guy named Clermont Ganneau, a Frenchman, and he said that Shapira had sold Moabite forgeries to the Prussian government. He said they were fakes. And so the other guy says, no. Shapira says, no, they weren't. Well, he says, no, those were fakes, and these are fakes too. Turns out Shapira ends up committing suicide in a hotel, and the fragments disappeared. Isn't that interesting? So just in the last few years, in 2021, this guy named Aiden Dershowitz published a book arguing for the authenticity of the fragments, that perhaps these were the first Dead Sea Scrolls. They had found Cave 12 somewhere and took these and sold them. And so he used Ginsberg's drawings of fragments. He made the case, and it has caused a lot of scholarly debate. Now, in 2021, he published this book called The Valediction of Moses. I did not read that book. It's $143, so that's a little too pricey for me. But it turns out that Jody Magnus says she believes that those were forgeries, because she does believe also that the others pieces that were sold to the Prussian government were fake. So she feels that they're forgeries. So this is a debate going on. There's still debate in scholarly circles having to do with this. Let me tell you about the discovery. And this is interesting because these two guys were responsible. They're cousins. The second guy, Muhammad Adib, he was nicknamed, his nickname, what was it? Now I'm just forgetting it. Shoot, do I have it written down? I'll think of it in a second. But Muhammad Adib is looking for a goat, according to the story. He's in November of 1946. He throws a rock into a cave, which turns out to be Cave 1. And here he is. He actually was quite a shyster. My professor, Ronald Youngblood, got to know this guy. And he would give tours to go up to Cave 1, take you up there and show you. And he's pointing up to where the hole was that you could throw a rock in, and he heard the smashing of pottery. And he sees 10 jars on the floor of the cave. 8 were empty, one's filled with dirt. One jar had 3 scrolls in it. So he finds a total of 7 full scrolls. That's what he's looking at right there. This is how he sees it. This is our group going up to Cave 1. Sometimes I've taken people up to Cave 1 with Joel Kramer, and that's Joel Kramer in the center with Bill McKeever and myself. This is the Cave 1 This is the one that he's pointing to. You can see the hole. The bottom is opened up by archaeologists, and the inside, you're seeing that from the inside going to the Dead Sea. And on the third picture, you're seeing a picture of the cave inside of it itself. Not very big. I would say it's from here to that case right there, and maybe from that chair to the wall. That's about how big the cave is. Now, if you get on your knees, you can go further in there, and I've done that. I've gone to the back of the cave, and we have seen bats in the back of the cave, so it's been kind of fun. So this guy says he's innocently just trying to find a goat. He throws this rock in. It's about 7-8 feet tall to get in, and so he throws this in. There's no way a goat could have gotten in there. He's just messing around. He hears the breaking of pottery, and he thinks to himself, this is a really good thing. I think that maybe there's gold and silver, and I'm going to be a rich man. I'm going to be a rich Bedouin. It turns out that he comes back the next day. There's different stories that are told. As this guy ends up telling stories, he tells about 5 different versions of it. The version that my professor got from him, he told him the story, and he says, yeah, he says, I went back to my to where my village was because it was too dark. So my cousin and I said we'd go back the next day, but then I got up before my cousin and I ran there so I could be the one who discovered it. And so that's the story that he tells. There it is, the wolf. Why did I forget that? Yeah, nickname the wolf. Well, that's how he gets the nickname. He's a shyster. He wants to get the full credit. He wants to get all the riches for himself. His cousin was pretty upset with him, apparently, he told my professor. He gets there, he climbs through the hole. It's light now, but it's still dark. So however, he uses matches or, and makes a fire so he can see what it is. And he's really discouraged because he had broken one of the jars that was holding the pieces, and he said, this is a waste of my time. There's a bunch of scrolls, 7 of them, and he ends up taking later. And by the way, there's all kinds of stories of what it was in that next 6 months because he doesn't sell them right away. Apparently, they took the scroll of Isaiah and hung it up to dry because they felt it was a little moist. So they hung it up on their tent to dry. That's a story that's told that maybe they did not sell it right away. But anyway, in 1948, he sells 4 of the scrolls that were the 7 to the Bethlehem cobbler named Kondo for 16 Jordanian dinars, which is about $24. So he sells 4, including the scroll of Isaiah. He sells those. This guy named Kondo is a dabbler in antiquities, but he's a shoe repairman. He's a cobbler. And so it took a while for them to find Kondo. They were trying to sell it to some other people, but he gets involved, and then he doesn't know what they are either. He says, I don't know what these things are. So he takes it to his leader of his church. He was part of the Syrian Orthodox Church, and this guy named Samuel, he was the head guy in Jerusalem. He sells it to Samuel for 24 British pounds, which is $97.20. Wow. He thinks he got a good deal because he just paid, $20 or whatever. He just 5 times his money. He doesn't know what it is. And then the other 3 scrolls are sold to a guy named Sukenik. Sukenik was a biblical scholar and archaeologist. He was the father of the famous Israeli archaeologist Yigal Yadin. He obtains these scrolls from the Bedouin for $28 in Bethlehem. He also gets a good deal, and that's the same day the UN makes Israel a nation. So he gets in there, he gets these scrolls, and he purchases them from the Bedouin. He's the first to recognize that these were from the time of Jesus, and they could be tied to the Essenes. He was too late, apparently. He was not able to get the other scrolls. So, with that being said, I'll just tell you the rest of the story real quick. It turns out that the guy who buys them, let's see, I want to make sure I'm doing this right. The guy who ends up buying them, Samuel, he doesn't know what they are, and it's going to be an American scholar that's going to help him. Let's just go through the cave one just to tell you what was involved in this. Community rule is identified as 1QS. That I read from it before. It's the word Sarek. It means community, and so that's why it's identified as 1QS. That's the community rule. They had a pesher, which is a kind of a commentary, if you will, of Habakkuk, and it's 1Q pesher Habakkuk. That's a commentary of Habakkuk. Then we have Isaiah 1, 1Q ISA A, which is the first of 2 copies of Isaiah. This is 24 feet, complete book, 54 columns of Isaiah. We have a picture of some of the columns up on our wall. Also, you have the Jewish Apocryphon. The Jewish Apocryphon is a sectarian text. And then you have on the other 3 that were purchased by Sukenik, you have the War Scroll. Mikmah means war or sectarian. It's a sectarian text. Thanksgiving hymns are kind of like the Psalms. And so you have that one. And then you have an incomplete text of Isaiah, Isaiah B. And that's spelled 1QSAB or 1Q8 is also how it's spelled. So and then you have some other scrolls that are found by archaeologists later in there. Now, real quick, just so you see how I was reading those. The way that you read these, if you go to the Reagan Museum, 1 stands for the cave number, or 4 or 11, whatever number it is. Q stands for Qumran. S is its name. And so this would be cave 1 in Qumran, the community rule, column 1, line 6 and 7. Not verses, lines. They count it by lines. There are no verses there. 4Q, 411. 1 small numerals 2, and then 7. And that would be K4, Qumran, the 411th manuscript, fragment 1, column 2, line 7. I know that it gets kind of deep there, but when they're telling you this is what it says, this is the number they're going to give you, and that's going to be very helpful if you're going to read these 2 books, because they're going to be throwing out these numbers, and to be able to read the scroll name, you at least know what cave number it is. That's pretty easy to determine. So when it comes to Isaiah, the Great Scroll, it's called 1Q ISA A 38, 9 through 14. It's cave 1 in Qumran, column 38, lines 9 through 14. Does that make sense a little bit? So you all have an idea of how to read that. Here's another way. This right here is the text of the Temple Scroll. It's found in cave 11, Q, and it's the 19th document. You have the Book of Enoch, 4QEN. And if there were multiple copies of that, it would have different numbers behind it. But that's what that is, 4QEN. And then you have the Messianic Testimonia, 4Q175. Again, there are over 500 pieces that were found in Cave 4. So what happens? I'm going to tell you the rest of the story. We have this guy named John Trevor. And he's an amateur photographer. He's a scholar over at the American School of Oriental Research in Jerusalem in February of 1948. And he says, actually, it was Samuel, the Syrian leader, who said, you guys know what this is? Because it's not Syriac. I don't know what it is. Can you help me with this? And he looks at it. He goes, oh my, yeah, this is Hebrew. And so he takes the scroll of Isaiah. By the way, that's a picture on the right of Samuel looking at the scroll of Isaiah, holding it with his hands. You know, and it seems like nobody understood in those days that that's not good, having finger oils all over this. And he's going, yeah, check this out. Here, look at this. And so, yeah. And so you have Samuel, and Trevor's on the right. He's also holding a scroll. I'm not sure which scroll. But he takes the Isaiah scroll, and he takes outdated film. They did not have new film in Israel. So he takes film that was overdated. Remember the old Kodak? 2-year-old film. What did you do with 2-year-old film? You usually tossed it. That's all he had. So he's opening it up and taking pictures of this thing, and then he sends it back to the United States. And this guy named William F. Albright, which is considered to be one of the greatest archaeologists of the 20th century, Johns Hopkins University, he sends a reply, my heartiest congratulations on the greatest manuscript discovery of modern time. I should prefer a date around 100 BC. What an absolutely incredible find. How would you like to know that you own one of the biggest finds ever? Well, it turns out that Samuel decides, I got to get these scrolls out of Dodge because now Israel's going to want them. And Jordan says, wait a minute, we're the ones that, when you found that, it was in 1947 when we owned it, we're going to want control of those. That's what he figured. So he got them out right away in 1948, and he takes his 4 scrolls to Lebanon, which is just up north. And so he was successful. So Jordan and Israel, he gets them out of Dodge. And then he decides, you know what, there's this position in the United States, Syrian Orthodox patriarchal leader. I'll take that job. So he gets it. He goes in 1949 and he takes his scrolls with him. But what is he going to do with a bunch of scrolls? So he decides to put in an ad in the Wall Street Journal. The ad is just one of those little 1-inch ads. And in it, it said, the 4 Dead Sea Scrolls, biblical manuscripts dating back to at least 200 BC are for sale. This would be an ideal gift to an educational or religious institution by an individual or group. Box F, 206, The Wall Street Journal.
I've never heard that. I have no idea about that.
Yeah, so he put an ad in there on June 1st, 1954. Now, you're reading your morning newspaper and you see that. What do you think? Well, you're probably asking yourself, how much does he want for it? Well, it turns out he wants $250,000. That was his asking price because people were going and saying, how much do you want? I want $250,000. Well, it turns out that Samuel was against the Jews. He was anti-Semitic because of all of the hassles that he had in Jerusalem. He hated the Jews. And the Jews wanted to buy it from him. We'll pay you money for it. He said, no, I will not sell to you. And then, in fact, he doesn't find out that it's the Jews who buy it. Israel buys it. He doesn't find that out until February 13th, 1955. Check this out. Give credit to the Jewish state. I mean, if they can come up with little pagers to put into people's pockets and blow them up, this is the kind of thing they did. They got a guy, his name was Harry Olinsky. He was a Hebrew expert, and they made him Mr. Green. And Mr. Green says, I'd like to buy this for my own institution and personal collection. Now, this is really good. How much do you want? $250,000. He says, no problem. I'll pay you. And he paid him a cashier's check that the Israeli government had put into his account. From his own account, $250,000. They buy them. And so you got one happy Samuel because, look, I just paid $100 and I just made $250. And I don't know if he got the money or who got it all, but I think it was supposed to be for his church. And you know what the Israeli government did? They flew 1 scroll at a time back to Israel. Why did they fly one back at a time?
We won't lose them all.
Yes. If a plane crashed, then you at least only lost 1 and you still have 3 left. So can you imagine the guy who bought a seat next to him and he's holding on to that thing like dear life, right? He's not going to put that in the bottom of the plane. And so they fly them 1 at a time. And today, all 4, along with the other 3 that were purchased, are all found at the Shrine of the Book. What's interesting, IRS gets involved. They tax the sale, even though it was supposed to be for the Syrian church. Now, I'm not sure if it was really the Syrian church or it was for him, but he said it was for the Syrian church. The IRS still taxed it. We got part of that money. The United States government did. It's been well spent since then, I'm sure. So now, guess what? Everybody's hearing there's gold in them there hills. And so you have a race, the archaeologists and the Bedouin. The Bedouin, they can get these and sell them for $100. Pretty good. That's more money than they would make in a year. So they're wanting the money. The archaeologists are going, oh, you know, this is important. This is very valuable. There has to be more than one cave. And so they ended up doing some research, and they found some caves. They had found some caves from the Bar Kokhba revolt, but they had not found anything else. And then they go back to Qumran, and they're finding these things. And the Bedouin end up finding 5. They found Cave 1 originally, Cave 2, Cave 4, perhaps the most important, 6 and 11. If you talk about the 3 most important caves, the Bedouin found it. 1, 4, and 11. Archaeologists found 6, 3, which is where the copper scroll was found, 5, 7 through 10. and there's not much in those compared to what the Bedouin found. What's the danger in having the Bedouin find them? Well, now they're going to do whatever they want with it. What are they going to do? Sell them, and to whoever wants to buy them. The last one discovered was Cave 11 in 1956, and they have found 30 more caves in the vicinity. None of them were found with scrolls. Were there more? We don't know. There's some belief, including Joe Kramer, my friend, says someday there will be an earthquake and we'll find more caves. He really believes that. So maybe there will be an earthquake that will see that. Today, as I mentioned, you can find those at the Shrine of the Book in the Israel Museum. They're kept there. You won't see all of them. They're kept in a nuclear-proof. In the bottom of this museum, it's all nuclear proof. And in fact, that middle piece that they have actually goes down into this bunker. What did they find as far as the manuscripts? They found our Hebrew Bible. They found fragments of the Septuagint. They found Targum and Pesherim would be the plural, the commentaries. They found Apocrypha. They found Pseudepigrapha. And pseudepigrapha are considered to be false writings. That would be like the book of Enoch and the book of Jubilees. And they found sectarian works, their own works. The Damascus document, it's called. They found the community rule, the war scroll, the halakhic letter in Cave 4. This gives you a better breakdown. This is a little easier. So if you want to break it down, about half were their Apocrypha, pseudepigrapha, things that we would not consider to be authoritative for us today, but are still valuable. So that's half of them. About a quarter are going to be sectarian texts, their own things like the community rule and the war scroll. So we learn a lot about them from those 200 plus manuscripts. And then 230 are biblical manuscripts. This gives you an idea of the first three caves. Cave 1 that I showed you is up in those hills. Off to the left a little bit is Cave 4. To the very south is Cave 3 and 11. Cave 3, again, had some things in there that really don't relate to the Qumran community. They're not sure about this in the scroll. I'll talk about what it contains probably next week. And then Cave 11. Here's another map of that. And so it shows you where those caves are. I'm going to go through real quick. Let me just go through the 11 caves. I'll finish, and I'm going to finish this next week. I promise to continue this and then to get into more details as to why this is important for us as Christians to know the accuracy of our Bible. First, Cave 1, what was in it? 7 complete scrolls, including 2 scrolls of Isaiah. Bedouin, get the check mark on that. Fortunately, we were able to get those back. So there's not a huge loss here. They had to pay a lot of money to get 4 of those back, but they do own all 7. And also the archaeologists, because the Bedouin did not dig in there, they actually found other pieces in Cave 1 that were valuable. So that's credit that for the archaeologists, even though they didn't find it. Like I said, in January of 1949, they found more scrolls. Cave 2. This is discovered by the Bedouin in 1952. They found fragments from 33 manuscripts. They found all 5 books of the Pentateuch, Jeremiah, and Psalms. This is a valuable cave as well. Again, the Bedouin are good at that. So they end up finding this. And so these fragments are going to have to be purchased back. And I'll tell you how that happens in just a minute. Cave 3, we have the copper scroll. It's 3Q15. There were 15 scrolls total found in Cave 3. You see a picture from the Jordan Museum in Amman. Bill and I were just there a couple years ago. We got to see the copper scroll. They created, it was in total 3 sheets of copper made into 23 strips. What they had to do is have a machine cut them. It took several years for them to open it up because it was so fragile and so thin to be able to read it. And you know what it was? It was a treasure map. This is why it was so unusual. It led to, according to the 3Q15, it was a total of 26 tons of gold, 65 tons of silver, billions and billions of dollars worth of materials, and they had 608 pitchers of silver, 619 gold and silver vessels. Incredible.
That's what was alleged on the scroll, or that's what was actually found?
This is what, when you count up all the things that they say, they use their own term. They used, there's a term that would have been used, and it's a weight. And so they if you count up how many hiding places they put it in, there were 64 hiding places where they would have hidden this. You have to understand, King Tut's gold coffin only weighed 240 pounds. Okay, we're talking, I mean, that's what, over a ton, but we're talking tons and tons of gold and silver.
This is just something they just said. I mean, it's not.
Well, this is the controversy, and they talk about it. So actually, there was a guy named Allegro, and in 1960, he publishes the text because he had access to it, and he publishes it illegally, and then it was not published officially until 1962. 1962. So 1960, he publishes it. He goes to the desert and spends a year searching, like they have that map challenge here, and that, you know, they give you clues and you're supposed to go find it. And they give you easier clues until it's eventually found. They didn't get the easier clues, but he went to all of the caves. He went out all over the area. Allegro thought it was real. And he looked for it, and he could not find it. And others have tried the same. So this is the most unique of all the scrolls because, again, written on copper, it's a treasure map. If it were real, Jeremy, if it were real, where does it come from? Most likely it would have been the Jerusalem temple. They're emptying it out because the Romans are going to come, and so they empty out all the valuables, put it into this cave. This cave, though, is the southernmost part. And so it's kind of strange. Why this cave that the other 14 documents don't really relate at all to the rest of Qumran, and then you find a copper scroll. We found nothing written on metal on the rest. Where did that possibly come from? Maybe it was Jews from Jerusalem, and maybe they're the ones who put that map together. Most scholars say it's a fraud. There's to literally come up with tons of gold and silver, not even the temple could have done that. So anyway, interesting. Cave 4, there were 500 scroll fragments. Here's the fun thing. The Bedouin find Cave 4, which is right where the village is. The Cave 4, when you go there to the village, you look right at Cave 4. It's like, how could they have missed this? And so they find it, and then the archaeologists realize, dang it, here we are digging right here, and they found that at night. And by the way, I have found diggings near Cave 1 that there have been Bedouin who are digging and are still looking for caves today. This was only a few years ago. So they're still digging today. Joel says it happens all the time. He sees dig marks. But so the archaeologists get inside this cave and they're like frustrated. It's on the edge of this marl cliff. And I guess a guy was just kind of going like this. Oh, man. And he hears it being hollow. So they dig a hole, and guess what? There was a second level filled with many more pieces of scroll. Now, these pieces were just thrown in there, so they're all crumbly. The Bedouin ended up taking all the ones on the first floor. They get the second floor. So then it took I forget which company it was, one of the Jewish companies put up money to be able to purchase the pieces that the Bedouin had. And so what they would do is they put them into a matchbox cover box, and they would put the pieces in there, and they would pay 50 cents per piece. And so the Bedouin would get in line. They had 10 pieces. They were getting $5, which was a lot of money. And they ran out of money. They had to go get more money. But that's how they purchased a lot of those, is by doing that. And so you're going to get the majority, 75% of all the Dead Sea Scrolls come from Cave 4. 75%. All are partial, many in small pieces. Again, that puzzle that I was talking about, how would you put a jigsaw puzzle together if you have 20 different 500 pieces all put together and all mixed up? It's just really hard. 137 of the biblical texts of the 220, 230, somewhere in that vicinity, are from Cave 4. So very, very important discovery, Cave 4. This is showing you, I showed you the Qumran village. Cave 4 is right there. You see it from the village. There's an area right there. It has covering where you can actually see Cave 4. Scrolls have been left to the elements. They found it on the first floor. This is Randall Price inside there, showing you where the archaeologists dug to find that basement. 574 manuscripts, 137 biblical, 15,000 total pieces. So what's the jigsaw puzzle? 500? Right? So that would be 500 piece jigsaw puzzles Mix them all up, throw them in there. Because the Bedouin had mixed them all up already. If you thought you were going to find pieces that were right next to each other, they tore in there and they took them all. And so that's the job of buying these back and then trying to figure out, where does this piece go? It's really difficult. Real quick, caves 5 and 6, fragments 25 to 50, rotting parchment scrolls, including Deuteronomy, 1 Kings, Isaiah, Psalms, Lamentations. Archaeologists found that one. Not a really important cave. You don't hear much about cave 5. Cave 6, 31 scrolls. They had Genesis, Leviticus, Deuteronomy. So a variety of things. Again, all but one of our 39 Old Testament books are found in these caves. 7 and 8, they found 20 pieces that were in Greek, including Psalms. Archaeologists found that, not a major cave. Cave 8 is it's a frustrating cave to find. It just has some from Psalms and Genesis. Archaeologists found that. Man-made cave. You can see the cave pictures there. Cave 9, they found one piece. Archaeologists are kind of losers when it comes to finding these. They find a papyrus fragment. One piece makes it a cave. Randall Price finds a cave. He doesn't find one piece. He doesn't get credit for finding cave 12. And by the way, since 1956, we have not found another cave. Cave 10, they found one inscribed potsherd, a piece of broken pottery. That's all they found, but it counts as a cave. 9 and 10, you never hear about those. So nobody ever writes about that. Cave 11 now is important. The Bedouin, of course, they're the ones who find this. 30 manuscripts. Some are complete in jars. So besides Cave 1, this is where we're finding the most complete pieces. They find Leviticus, Psalms. They find a Targum of Job. The Temple Scroll is the largest and longest scroll. So we have all of that. Last thing before we continue, I want to just say, how could they have survived? Because the temperatures are dry. It gets up to 125 degrees with no humidity, which is a good thing when you're trying to store things. Some of the caves are pretty much sealed, so you're not going to have much airflow going there. So there's not going to be bacteria. One of my scrolls on the wall has mold on it because it got wet, and so now the mold is going to destroy it. You don't have that problem here because it's not a wet place. They have fewer than 2 to 4 inches of rain per year, and we do have the best preserved scrolls, caves 1 and 11, that were protected, and the carbon ink they used was good. What's the worst thing that could have happened, though? That they found them. Because I'm going to show you next week that they treated the scroll pieces badly, very badly. They used their hands to hold them. They had them in sunlit rooms. They were smoking cigarettes as they would look at the scroll pieces, and the ash would fall down on them. Bizarre, brutal. It would never happen today. And so they even use that old acetone tape. Remember what your mother used to use for Christmas presents? They use acetone tape to tape pieces together, working in sunlit rooms. They put them between glass. One of the things that we try not to do is put glass right up to our Torah documents. Why? Because the sun gets on it, and you peel it back, and it takes part of the scroll away with it. So that was the worst thing. Next week, I am going to continue on talking about the scrolls. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about some of the biblical scrolls in detail, and then I will transfer that over into the Bible and how we can trust the Bible. And I'm also, at the end, going to talk about Mormonism and why the Mormons have tried to say the Dead Sea Scrolls have supported their view of the Book of Mormon and other things, that there's information there that will give credence to the Mormon position, and it's not true.